Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT video. Today we'll be doing part 2 of our Set 6 champion review. This will feature the second half of the new champions ranging from the letters M to Z. As Set 6 is still on the PBE, we will refrain from using too many specific numbers as those are likely to change. Instead, we'll talk about their cost, traits, and abilities, and a brief critique of their overall design. Got a lot to cover, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Continuing from where we left off, we have Malzahar. Malzahar is a 3-cost champion with the tags Mutant and Arcanist. For his ability, Malzahar targets the closest enemy champion and puts a dot on them, which deals damage per second and reduces their magic resist. If that enemy dies, the dot will spread. Being a damage over time ability makes Malzahar an interesting support champion, but with the right mutant buff, he can easily become a carry. Definitely expect to see Malzahar as a staple mid-game champion, particularly when playing an AP board or mutants in general. This fortune returns again as a 3-cost champion with the same ability she had in Set 5. The change here is her damage is a bit lower overall since she doesn't have Forgotten to scale with. Instead, her synergies are Mercenary and Sniper, neither of which really add much value to her ability. More than likely, MF will be used as a support champion and rarely as the main damage dealer. Into the letter O we go with Orianna. Orianna makes her debut into TFT as a 4-cost utility champion with the traits Clockwork and Enchanter. Primarily expect to see Orianna splashed in for her 2 synergies, though depending on balance, she may be a capable carry. Overall, though, she's a stellar support champion thanks to her ability that can AoE displace a group of units while also providing a shield to nearby allies. Next up is Poppy. Poppy is once again a 1-cost champion with the same ability she had in Set 5, Buckler Toss. There is a difference as this time the damage scales off of her armor, though it still applies a shield. As for her traits, Poppy is a Yordle bodyguard, so expect to see her used in the early game as a frontliner as well as on a Yordle board. Quinn is our only Q champion with an ability that disarms the target with the highest attack speed. Disarm is a powerful CC, especially since it's generally going to hit the enemy carry. Besides her ability, Quinn is also a 2-cost with the traits Mercenary and Challenger, making her mainly a backline support champion. There's a lot of S champions, though we're not talking about the tier, just the letter. Our first S champion is Samira. Samira is now a 3-cost champion with the traits Imperial and Challenger, making her an ideal 3-cost carry and item holder. To further that playstyle, Samira's ability does a cone of damage to adjacent enemies and reduces their armor or fires an empowered shot at one target and gains 20 mana. Being able to reduce armor does mean Samira has utility value, so she's capable of being played multiple ways. Seraphine drops in as a 4-cost innovator and socialite with a support focus ability that heals allies and also applies an attack speed buff while also doing magic damage to enemies. Socialite is a great tag to splash in, so expect to see Seraphine used quite often thanks to splashable traits and her utility ability. The terror of Set 3, Shaco, is returning once again as a 3-cost champion with the secondary trait of Syndicate. Shaco's ability is roughly the same as Set 3, so expect to see him utilized as a mid-game assassin carry with the potential to be 3-starred. The last time we saw Singed, he was an unstoppable 5-cost champion, but in Set 6, he's an alright 1-cost frontliner with the traits Chemtech and Innovator. With a useful utility ultimate that flings and stuns enemies, we expect to see Singed as a staple frontliner for early game boards. Scion goes from an unstoppable monstrosity to an unstoppable 4-cost Colossus champion. Along with that tag, he's also a Protector and Imperial. Pair those traits with his ability that does an AoE stun and a good chunk of damage, it's sufficient to say that Scion will be a monster of a frontliner for mid to late game boards. And the final S champion is Swain. Swain is only a 2-cost champion this time around with the synergies Imperial and Arcanist. However, Swain does pack a decent punch with his ability that does magic damage in a cone. In conjunction with the damage, an enemy hit by that cone will also heal Swain. Stack defensive items on Swain and pair him with his 2 scaling synergies and enjoy as Swain continually heals himself to full. Time to transition towards T letters with Tahm Kench. Don't bench the Kench as having him on your board is important for the trait Glutton. Glutton allows you to feed 1 champion per round to Tahm Kench, providing him a permanent boost to a specific stat depending on the type of champion fed to him. Alongside Glutton, Kench is also a 5-cost Mercenary and Bruiser, making him an ideal late-game frontliner. His ability is quite long, so we recommend reading it over, but the basic premise is he eats enemies, does damage while he has them in his stomach, and then spits them out. If they die while being eaten, you gain either gold or a component, so Tahm Kench has a lot of ways to scale in a game. Next up is Talon, a 2-cost Imperial Assassin that causes enemies hit by his auto attacks to bleed, taking damage over time. If Talon continually attacks the same target, the third hit will apply an additional bleed. Having a passive with no mana makes Talon quite unique, just don't bleed too much health trying to force him every game. Tarik is a 3-cost support frontliner with the synergies Enchanter and Socialite. He heals himself and the lowest health ally, so basically he's not all that interesting. Expect to see Tarik splashed in for Socialite as well as Enchanter, otherwise he may not be all that commonly used. Even though Tristana is returning as a 2-cost champion, she's no longer jumping around the battlefield. Instead, with the traits Yordle and Sniper, Tristana wants to sit in the back, dealing damage and shooting her ability that does physical damage to the first enemy hit. If they're too close to her, the target is also stunned and knocked back. Tristana is great for dealing with assassins jumping onto your backline and is a decent early game item carry. Trundle is back to steal stats, though this time he's only trolling the enemy champion's attack damage as his bite does damage, lowers their attack speed, and steals a bit of their attack damage for the rest of the fight. Still a 2-cost champion, Trundle isn't quite as terrifying as he was in the previous set, though he definitely has a place in the early game with the synergy Scrap and Bruiser. Whew, so many T champions. Up next is Twisted Fate, a 1-cost Syndicate champion with Arcanist as a secondary trait. Twisted Fate isn't all that interesting with his ability that throws cards that do magic damage to enemies hit. Alright for an early game damage dealer, but overall not that special. The final T champion is Twitch. Twitch is a 1-cost assassin and Chemtech champion that shoots a piercing bolt, dealing a percent of his attack damage in addition to bonus physical damage. Enemies hit also have their healing reduced. Twitch is a decent item holder, but he can be rather lackluster and mainly serves as a trait bot. We're into the final stretch of champions, let's continue with Ergot. Ergot is a 4-cost carry backliner with the synergies Twin Shot and Chemtech. The unique aspect about Ergot is his ability, which causes his attacks to shoot at a fixed rate, dealing physical damage. The rate at which those attacks fire is constant, but the damage does scale with attack speed as well as attack damage. Ergot can shred through enemies quickly with his ability, especially since the attacks can proc Twin Shot. Expect to see Ergot as a common late game 4-cost carry. Vex makes her gloomy debut into TFT's the 3-cost Yordle and Arcanist. Thanks to her ability, Vex is a great frontliner for her 2 synergies as she gains a massive shield that does a big burst of damage when it expires. If the shield is destroyed, it's instead stronger on the next cast. This can stack during combat, so if Vex continually survives, she eventually gains a massive shield. Overall, since the range of her ability is limited, Vex will mostly be relegated to the front line. That does make her quite valuable for both Yordles and Arcanist compositions. Vi is a unique 2-cost champion with the synergies Enforcer, Bruiser, and most importantly, Sister. Sister is the unique synergy that pairs her with Jinx. When this trait is active, Vi gains additional range on her ability, which is an AoE cone that deals magic damage and reduces the armor of enemies. The buff from Sister makes Vi a threat in the late game, as she can hit a good portion of the enemy board when positioned well. Otherwise, Vi is a typical frontline bruiser that can also be splashed in for Enforcer. Next, we have Victor, a 5-cost Chemtech and Arcanist champion. Victor is meant to be a late game destroyer as his ability summons multiple death rays that can hit a good portion of the battlefield. Not only do these rays deal a lot of magic damage, they also reduce the shields of enemies hit. In addition to that, Victor's auto attacks will passively lower the enemy's armor. The unique aspect of Victor, alongside with being able to reduce shields, makes him a splashable champion for any late game board even without his synergies active. Warwick may be returning as Warwick returns as a 2-cost challenger and Chemtech champion. Why we're mentioning Warwick is because Warwick's auto attacks passively deal a percentage of the target's current health as well as healing him. With a defensive synergy like Chemtech and an offensive synergy like Challenger, it makes Warwick the perfect candidate for a reroll focused composition utilizing him as the carry. Maybe it won't be just Warwick, but Warset instead. Yonei is up next as a 4-cost carry with the synergies Challenger and Academy. Yonei's ability is quite unique as it creates a spirit that attacks nearby enemies. The spirit is an untargetable and invulnerable clone of Yonei, and each time it deals damage, it heals Yonei for a percentage of that damage. But when Yonei dies, so does the clone. Much like Fiora, Yonei is a Challenger melee carry. Both of them can be used this way or as a trait bot for the Challenger synergy. The main difference between them, outside of their ability, is that Academy adds additional stats to Yonei, making it potentially a better carry in the long run. The cuddly and lovable Yumi has returned to TFT, this time as a 5-cost support champion that attaches herself to a nearby allied champion. While attached, Yumi grants that champion a shield while she gains mana per second. Yumi is also capable of casting her ability while attached, sending out 4 waves that deal a bit of damage while also briefly stunning enemies hit. With so many support capabilities, Yumi is expected to be a common late game addition to any board, even without utilizing her 2 other synergies of Scholar and Academy. We've reached the final letter Z, and to start it off, we have Zack, a 3-cost bruiser and Chemtech champion. Zack has 2 defensive synergies, making him an ideal mid-game frontliner. In addition to that, he brings a bit of CC as his ability pulls the 2 most distant enemies within a certain amount of hexes towards himself. This ability also deals a bit of damage, but the displacement and mini-stun are what matters most. Not the most exciting of champions, but definitely a potential staple frontliner. Up next, we have Ziggs. Ziggs is back as a 1-cost champion, this time with the synergies Yordle and Arcanist. Ziggs once again throws a bomb, but it's after a small delay and does reduced AoE damage to enemies near the main target. More than likely, Ziggs will be relatively niche with Yordles or as a trait bot for Arcanist, as his prowess on the battlefield is rather limited. The next Z champion is Zillion. Zillion winds his way into set 6 as a 2-cost Clockwork and Innovator champion. While those 2 traits do make Zillion valuable, the main reason to use Zillion is for his ability. This is because it applies a stun to the initial target, and after the stun expires, it explodes, dealing magic damage to the target and adjacent enemies. In addition to that stun and AoE damage, the bomb also applies an attack speed debuff for a few seconds. Innovator may be a bit difficult to splash into compositions, but luckily Zillion is also Clockwork, which is likely to be used quite often. Zillion pairs perfectly with Orianna to provide additional utility alongside the team-wide attack speed buff of Clockwork. That said, Zillion is a bit lackluster in terms of damage, so it's not improbable for him to be used sparingly past the early game. And the final champion on today's list is Zyra. Zyra is now a 2-cost champion with the synergy Syndicate and Scholar. While she does still use her vines as her ability, instead of throwing them in a line towards the enemy, it now hits the row with the most enemies. This does make it much harder for Zyra to be effective as the fight goes on, but at least she still stuns, so she has some utility. And that's it for today's video, folks. Overall, this set has a ton of well-designed champions that should make for entertaining games, especially with the augment system mechanic. There's also one more champion we didn't talk about, but if you want to unveil that secret, you may want to test out Yordles when set 6 goes live. Let us know in the comment section below what champions we've covered today that you're the most excited for. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.